Your body contains trillions of cells. Yet somehow, each one knows when to grow, when to divide, and even which proteins to synthesize. So where are all these instructions stored? Inside almost every cell, there's a structure that acts as a command center, the nucleus. Here, we will discover how the nucleus protects DNA, controls cellular activities, and helps build the machinery needed for life itself. So, let's start with the basics. The nucleus is generally the largest and most visible organelle inside a eukaryotic cell. Its most important job is storing DNA, which contains all the genetic instructions needed for life. These instructions tell the cell what proteins to produce and how to perform different activities. Without the nucleus, the cell would lose access to its genetic information and would not be able to function properly. That's why the nucleus plays such a central role in almost everything the cell does. In most cells, the nucleus appears as a large round structure located somewhere near the center. And although it looks simple from the outside, there's actually a lot happening inside it. Now that we know what the nucleus does, let's open it up and see what's inside. When we look inside the nucleus, we find several important components working together. First, we have the nuclear envelope, which surrounds and protects the nucleus. Then there are nuclear pores, which act like tiny gateways. Inside the nucleus is a jelly-like material called nucleoplasm. Floating within this nucleoplasm is chromatin, which contains DNA and proteins. We also find the nucleolus, a darker region that plays a major role in ribosome production. Each of these structures has a specific function. So even though the nucleus looks like a single organelle, it's actually a highly organized system. Let's begin with the outer boundary that protects everything inside, the nuclear envelope. The outermost part of the nucleus is called the nuclear envelope. This structure acts like a protective barrier around the nucleus. One interesting feature is that it has two membranes instead of one. Both membranes are phospholipid bilayers, just like the cell membrane. Another important point is that the outer membrane is connected directly to the endoplasmic reticulum. This connection helps coordinate activities between the nucleus and the rest of the cell. The nuclear envelope does not completely isolate the nucleus, though. Materials still need to move in and out. And this is where nuclear pores become important. These are special openings that allow materials to move in and out of the nucleus. So if the nuclear envelope is the wall, the nuclear pores are the doors that control traffic. Scattered throughout the nuclear envelope are thousands of tiny openings called nuclear pores. These pores carefully regulate what enters and leaves the nucleus. Small molecules and ions can move through them. Important molecules such as RNA can also pass through when needed. Think of nuclear pores as security checkpoints. Not everything is allowed through automatically. The cell controls which substances enter and which substances leave. This control is essential because the nucleus contains valuable genetic information. Without these checkpoints, communication between the nucleus and the cytoplasm would become disorganized. So the pores help maintain both protection and efficient communication. Once substances pass through the pores, they enter the material that fills the nucleus, called the nucleoplasm. Inside the nucleus is a semi-solid material known as nucleoplasm. It's not completely liquid and not completely solid. Instead, it has a gel-like consistency. The nucleoplasm supports and surrounds all the structures found inside the nucleus. Both chromatin and the nucleolus are suspended within it. It also provides a medium where many nuclear activities take place. DNA replication, RNA production, and other important processes occur in this environment. Without the nucleoplasm, the internal organization of the nucleus would be much more difficult to maintain. Now let's focus on the most important material inside the nucleus, DNA and its organization. Most of the DNA inside a non-dividing cell exists as chromatin. Chromatin is made of DNA wrapped around special proteins. These proteins help organize and package the DNA. When chromatin is spread out, it looks like a tangled collection of thin threads. This loose arrangement is actually beneficial. It allows the cell to access genes more easily when information is needed. The cell can read a specific part of DNA and use those instructions to make proteins. So chromatin is not just storage. It's a working form of DNA that allows genetic information to be actively used. But chromatin doesn't always stay loose and thread-like. Sometimes it becomes much more compact. When a cell prepares to divide, the chromatin begins to coil and condense. As it becomes more compact, it forms structures called chromosomes. These chromosomes are much easier to move and distribute during cell division. Interestingly, chromosomes are usually visible only when a cell is dividing. At other times, the DNA remains mostly in the chromatin form. Different species have different numbers of chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes in most body cells. Fruit flies have only 8 chromosomes. Even though the numbers are different, chromosomes perform the same basic function. They store and organize genetic information. Now that we have seen how DNA is packaged, let's look at the special region where ribosomes begin their journey. Inside the nucleus, there is often a dark and dense region called the nucleolus. The nucleolus has a very important function. It helps produce ribosomes. Certain regions of DNA contain information for making ribosomal RNA, or rRNA. These molecules gather inside the nucleolus. There, they combine with proteins to form ribosomal subunits. You can think of the nucleolus as a ribosome assembly factory. Once the ribosomal subunits are built, they leave the nucleus through nuclear pores. They then travel into the cytoplasm, where they become functional ribosomes. So what happens after these ribosomal components leave the nucleus? The nucleus controls protein production through genetic instructions stored in DNA. First, information from DNA is copied into RNA. This RNA is then transported to the cytoplasm through nuclear pores. At the same time, ribosomal subunits produced in the nucleolus also leave the nucleus. In the cytoplasm, ribosomes read the RNA instructions. Using those instructions, proteins are produced. Since proteins carry out most cellular functions, controlling protein production means controlling cell activities. This is why the nucleus is often described as the command center of the cell. Its influence extends throughout the entire cell. Let's bring all these parts together and see how they work as one coordinated system. The nucleus works because all of its parts cooperate. The nuclear envelope provides protection. Nuclear pores regulate communication. The nucleoplasm creates a supportive environment. Chromatin stores and organizes genetic information. Chromosomes ensure DNA is properly distributed during cell division. The nucleolus assembles ribosomal subunits. Together, these structures help the cell to store information, access genes, synthesize ribosomes and produce proteins. Every part has a role, and when they work together, the cell can function efficiently and respond to changing conditions. Before we finish, let's summarize the most important ideas to remember. So, what should we remember about the nucleus? First, it stores the cell's DNA. Second, it acts as the control center by regulating gene activity and protein production. Third, the nuclear envelope and pores protect DNA, while allowing communication with the rest of the cell. Fourth, DNA exists as chromatin most of the time and becomes chromosomes during cell division. And finally, the nucleolus is responsible for assembling ribosomal subunits. Together, these features make the nucleus one of the most important organelles in every eukaryotic cell, and understanding the nucleus helps us understand how life works at the cellular level.